All right, this unit, the Enlightenment Revolutions, it's a hybrid unit where you'll be working from the textbook in class, so you'll need to bring your textbook, and it's going to be part lecture as well. So this presentation right here, you'll see, where it's going to be, which part's lecture and which part's working from the book. So the Enlightenment and Revolution. So the last unit, we called it the Enlightenment, where you have Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, all of these new ideas that butted up against absolute monarchy and monarchies in general, and democracy developed. The old power system of monarchy tried really strongly to hold on to their power in the face of all of these new ideas, and that's where revolutions occurred. So there are many revolutions that take place. I mean, you have the American Revolution, you have the French Revolution, you have revolutions in Latin America. So it pretty much goes viral. So here are the review questions. If you want to write it down, go ahead and pause. All right, so let's take a look at Enlightenment ideas of government power. So let's start right here. Sources of government power. The power comes from the people. Very simple. The government and the economy. Laissez-faire means the government keeps its hands off the economy. So back when monarchies were strong and people wanted to do some sort of economic activity like trade goods or something like that, so they'd go to another part of the world, pick up goods, bring it back to the mother country. This was pretty much inefficient. It would have been more efficient had they have had a free market where the king has no say as to how people trade or pick up goods, but if the king wants a cut of the action in terms of like getting money from their effort, then you would turn to taxation. The goal of government was going to be material well-being, social justice. So in a sense, the goal of government, according to Locke, and if you remember, is to protect property. But when you protect property, you also protect safety. And like he said, his definition of property was essentially what Thomas Jefferson changed it to, was the pursuit of happiness. The purposes of government, and again, this is John Locke's idea, was to protect natural rights. And again, John Locke's idea, when the government fails, the people have the right to overthrow the government. And the power of the government, it's kind of a question, absolute power or limited power. Enlightenment thinkers, Rousseau, Montesquieu in particular, would want a limited government. And then here's Montesquieu's idea of the separation of power, structure of governments, checks and balances. You weaken the government by taking its three core powers, and then separate it out and make them work against each other. So you have the spread of Enlightenment ideas. The first one was salons, and a salon today would be a place where you get your hair cut. A salon back then was a place where quasi-rich people, because they had time on their hands. If you were a farmer, you were working all day and probably illiterate. So salons weren't really something you joined. But here you have some nobles, and what they did is they got together, kind of like dinner parties and things like that, and they discussed these new ideas. They started to spread, and it's like today you have people who have political discussions and things like that, and it incenses them, and they go out and vote, or they go run for office. You have Diderot's encyclopedia, and what Diderot did is he took all of these Enlightenment ideas and he cataloged them and put them in some sort of order. So everyone could like reference, what did John Locke say, and what did this philosopher say, and what type of government should we have? And then small pamphlets. Today you would see this maybe as a website. You have different political organizations today, like the ACLU or PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And on their website, they sort of explain their message and why they're doing it, and what they organize for. These small pamphlets really, back then, were just about spreading Enlightenment ideas. So people would, take home like a small book and it had a summary of what was going on. And then you had the monarchs. Courts of the monarchs are basically all of the people who hang out with the king. So a king could have a crew of 50 people. It's like today when you have rappers who have like their crew or their entourage or something like that. Monarchs had their courts. And oftentimes these people in the courts were really there to suck up to the king and, all of that stuff. They weren't there to like whisper in his ear and say, what you said there, like just 5 seconds ago, that really sucked. You wouldn't be part of the court of the monarch if you said stuff like that. So basically the courts of the monarchs were almost sort of tattletales. Here's what's going on outside. They're saying this, they're saying that. You probably want to do something about it. And because there was such a groundswell, meaning like there was such a popularity with these new ideas, the monarchs some of the monarchs had to sort of change the way they ran things to appease the people who had these ideas. And democracy it spreads like a virus. I mean, it's not like a sickness or anything like that. But it spread once people have these ideas that they have natural rights, that the king is an absolute power. And if the king feels like he is an absolute power, we have the right to grab weapons and overthrow him. These ideas persist today. If you talk to people who reason that we have the right to bear arms, one of the arguments they make is that they need to be able to protect themselves against a government that becomes tyrannical or becomes bad. So you have three monarchs who became what you call major enlightened despots, or people who were really, these monarchs were really for, and I'll go back to that they are for these Enlightenment ideas. You have Frederick the Great and Prussia. So you read in there, Prussia was is now today a part of Germany. So Frederick the Great made the Prussian government more efficient. So he put people in charge who could easily, so he sort of took a lot of the burden off his shoulders in terms of like handling this, handling that, and he started delegating the powers. So he wasn't quite an absolute ruler, meaning all decisions rested with him. He trusted other people to make decisions for him. Tolerated religious differences. So back then people were religiously intolerant. And what's interesting is some kings allowed for religious intolerance, and the people that they ruled over didn't like that. So it kind of cut both ways. And he despised torture, meaning he didn't like it. It's not that he got rid of it, it's just he didn't like it. And then you have Joseph II of Austria. The peasants, basically, if the peasants start hearing about these ideas that they have rights and stuff like that, they're going to grab pitchforks and start stabbing rich people. So to keep that from happening, he worked to improve the peasants' way of life, provided systems to where, it's like most peasants grow food. If there's a famine, or not a famine, but if there's a drought or something like that, the king probably wouldn't take a lot of their property as taxation, probably allow them to, subsist on what they have, and attempted again to modernize Austria's government in the same way Frederick the Great did. And then you have Catherine the Great. Again, Russian law and government reforms, trying to spread out that, again, you have those absolute rulers who make all the decisions, and then they started delegating to other people who could concentrate on, hey, what's the economy doing? What are the people saying? What do they need? Things like that. She actually got rid of torture, which is kind of nice. And she criticized the institution of serfdom. Serfdom is essentially slavery. You're a slave and you're tied to the land. Peasants could theoretically move around and move to an area, but if you had a landowner, the serfs were the ones who stayed and worked the land. So here's a map of where they're at. So you have Austria, Prussia's so here's Berlin. So here's like Germany today right here, but Prussia's like up, sort of northern area right here. You have 20 or so individual countries in here, and they were united and became Germany, but that's much later. And then you have Russia, Catherine the Great. We're going to go ahead and do this in class, but it's basically you're dipping back into Unit 1, and you're going to talk about Hobbes, Locke, and all these guys. Probably going to get rid of 12 tables. We didn't really go over that. And, you know, Hobbes, philosopher who thought people need to be controlled. So we'll go ahead. Well, I'll go ahead. Well, I mean, I think I gave, yeah, that's what I did. I gave you the first one, so you know, like, what to do. So there are the examples right there. And you would just complete the rest in class. Whoops. You would just complete the rest in class. And again, here's what you're going to be doing in class. So you got to work out the book, chapter 7.1, 218, Skill Builder 1 and 2. In your notes, you're going to look at a picture. So in your notes, describe, this is the first estate. So we're going to talk about the estates. In France, you have the first, second, and third estate. The first is the rich people, the king, the clergy, that whole thing. The second estate were the nobles, who were fairly rich, and then they still had to work, but they were fairly rich. And then you had the peasants, and they were poor, and they always worked. And the peasants made up about 95% of the population. So here's a quote, and we'll go over that in class. You could probably just quiz yourself on this, and I give the answers away. And then again, here's another picture. You have the first and second estate writing the back of an old man. So in your notes, go ahead and describe what you see, write that down. And then here's another picture, political cartoon, you know, and try to answer those questions in your notes as well. And here you go again. Go ahead and paraphrase the quote right here. What are they trying to say? And then what do you see? All in the context. So going back to the skill builder, this is going to help you answer the rest of these and explain these quotes and stuff. So here's the Bastille, and we'll talk about the Bastille. I have a video in class. We'll show the raiding of the Bastille. So basically peasants in France got sick of their conditions, and the Bastille was both a prison and where they kept all the weapons. So peasants went over and just broke the doors down, freed all the prisoners, and got all the guns, which to French leadership was probably one of the worst things to happen. And then, okay, here's your bookwork again, and you can go ahead and pause it to get that. And then here's another cartoon to take a look at and write about. This is going to be a project you're going to do, so I'll probably put this on a separate piece of paper. But if you want to stop and pause and take a look at that, you may. Again, we're going to be doing this. We're going to be getting into Napoleon and the French Revolution. So here's Napoleon Empire. If you want to stop and take a look at the map and stuff like that, may help you answer questions later on. Here are some battles he did. And here's how it was divided up after he did his thing. And this is where you're going to start getting the bookwork you did previous and the bookwork you're doing right now will help explain Napoleon and what went on in Latin America. And again, this will be Latin America. And I love this one. The Congress of Vienna. Let's put things back the way it was before Napoleon and the French Revolution and the people of Europe. It's a meme. I know, I'm lame. And then I'll explain this in class, the bonds that create a nation state. You know, basically a nation state like a country, like France or Germany or something like that. You have a shared culture, and that's one of the things that troubles the United States, and we see so much strife, is we really don't have a shared culture. When you have a country that is homogenous, meaning like all people are one people, you tend to have more harmony. Now, that's not to say that having a heterogeneous or a nation of many cultures is a bad thing. That's not what I'm saying. It's just sort of what you see. A common history, a common past. Again, with the United States, we don't really share a common history. We don't really share language. We do share territory. We don't share nationality, and we don't share religion. But in France and England, Germany, they worked to basically, and that's kind of the thing. I mean, it is an important point. If you think of like Germany, if you didn't fit the German mold of what they wanted, so the big one was being Protestant, so that's a religion. If you were Catholic, they wouldn't allow you to worship, so you had a lot of Catholics who popped over to the United States. The United States became a place where all these people who didn't fit the mold in Europe fled to. And so that's really one of the big positives of the United States is we became a place where people could be free. And then we'll talk about nationalist movements. So you go from having this shared culture and history and all of this stuff. So you become one homogeneous group. And then you start to see nationalism where people take pride in who they are. So, I mean, you can discuss stereotypes like if you describe a French person, you probably think of like a beret and they go, ha, ha, ha. Or if you think of a German person, they're really loud or really strict or something like that. You see a lot of these stereotypes or hear a lot of these stereotypes that, are pretty untrue. But you see nationalist movements. So you see like people becoming in Europe, France, England, Germany. They become very proud of their heritage or their common heritage. So you have unification. Italy started unifying. They started bringing together states where everyone considered themselves Italian. And then you had Germany that really like unified a lot of different, they call them states, but they're really sort of like countries. They unified a lot of countries and they unified what they thought were quote unquote German people. You start to see separation where, like I was talking about, you have Catholics in Germany who didn't want to be Protestant, so they came to the United States. And then state building. Culturally distinct groups form a new state by accepting a single culture. So again, the fallout for people fleeing Germany is we started building a nation of these people who fled Europe to seek freedom. And that pretty much concludes the slideshow. We'll go ahead and, so this will be the unit, and then you'll obviously do working class as well.